Tonight we're going to uncover a document so dangerous it was supposed to vanish forever, not lost to time but hidden away in the shadows by those who feared what it could unleash. This wasn't written by any church leader or holy messenger, but by a group that the church tried to completely wipe out. This is a thick book of old ceremonies, star alignments, forbidden practices and symbols that mean more than any church song. For many years, the Vatican has kept its secrets safe with walls, fire and fear. But deep beneath its old buildings, something even older was still there. A manuscript filled with Egyptian magic, talking about winged beings, blinding light, memories that could break you, and knowledge that was taken from humanity itself. This isn't just a forgotten story. It's a stolen god. It's a story of reflections, codes, old items and whispers, and it puts at risk the very things the church was built to protect. So, before it's too late, think about this. What if the real danger isn't studying the text, but remembering it? Do you like this show? Subscribe, because tonight we're going deep into the most dangerous book the Vatican has ever found. It all started with rumours. Whispers floating through the busy streets of Cairo. Secrets in the dark corners of old ruins and quiet coffee shops. An explorer had found something amazing. Not a carving, not an old scroll. A book wrapped in strange dark-coloured skin that shined like oil in the hot sun. No one could figure out where it came from. No one dared to say who really owned it. But witnesses swore it pulsed as if it were alive. The year was 1932. A European buyer named Renault bought it from someone who only called himself the Keeper. The trade happened in complete silence. No names, no papers, just the book, wrapped in cloth, going from one shaky hand to another. Renault took it to his rented room by the river and looked at it in the flickering light of a candle. What he saw inside took his breath away. It wasn't just the writing, though that was pretty strange. Symbols like hieroglyphs, but older, smoother, more alive. It was the pictures. Maps of star groups that didn't match any known sky. Human shapes with no faces, eyes looking from the corners, drawings that folded in on themselves as if they were bending reality. Renault sent one message to a contact in Rome, then disappeared completely. He vanished without explanation. His home was untouched, except the book was gone. 10 years passed. A big war started and ended. Then, in a storage room of an old empty monastery in Upper Egypt, the book showed up again, hidden under broken stone slabs inside a container sealed with tree sap and written on in Greek, Latin and something much older. The monks who found it were speechless. They understood. They told someone. Not the local police, not any museum, but the Vatican. 2 people showed up the next day. They wore simple dark clothes and had no badges. The old monk was never seen again. The document was quietly taken away. No pictures, no records. Just the lingering smell of burnt wicks and something metallic in the air. The feeling you get when something important leaves a place. In Rome, the manuscript was locked away, its existence denied. The Vatican called it dangerous, unstable. Some said it was cursed. But the truth was more unsettling. It wasn't just what the book contained. It was what it kept safe, what it refused to show. A reality from before the Bible, before the church, before history was changed. The story should have ended there, buried behind stone and silence. But it kept going, because sometimes a book doesn't just disappear, sometimes it waits. It waits for someone who can read deeper meanings, someone who still remembers what was erased. And that's where our story truly begins. The monastery looked abandoned, its stone walls crumbling in the desert heat. The crosses carved into the sandstone were faded and cracked, as if holding secrets. No one had prayed there for decades, maybe centuries. But something underneath remained waiting. It started when researchers arrived with money to look at the remains of early Coptic Christians. Nothing special, just another trip to a place full of bones and broken pillars. But after 3 days, someone heard a hollow sound. Not an echo, a voice trapped in the stone. They dug deeper, moving the sand by hand when tools seemed too loud. Then the ground gave way. Under the monastery lay a hidden room, perfectly sealed, decorated with symbols no one could recognize. Not Greek, not Latin, not even hieroglyphs. Something older, something no one wanted to admit could be real. The group hesitated. It felt strange, cold, as if the air hadn't changed for thousands of years. But curiosity always wins. Inside they found old items wrapped in cloth that hadn't decayed, objects made of materials they couldn't identify. A mirror polished to a perfect black surface that showed nothing, a staff carved with spirals that twisted endlessly, and scrolls so delicate they seemed to whisper when touched. But the real shock wasn't finding them, it was their surprise. One scroll had a symbol that matched a piece found earlier in the Vatican's collection, a symbol that had never been shown publicly, that was meant to be removed. Yet there it was, buried in Egypt under a Christian monastery, written in a language that shouldn't exist. The expedition leader wanted to record everything, but 2 team members left the site without explanation. One reported a vision where the chamber opened by itself and showed something that left him in tears for hours. The other didn't speak at all. He just packed his things and walked into the desert. Within days, the site was abandoned. The official statement talked about structural problems. No money, no entry, nothing worth noting. But everyone there knew better. The monastery wasn't just ruins, it was a disguise, and whatever it hid had been purposely hidden. Some believe the chamber came before not just Christianity, but all recorded civilizations. That it belonged to a people erased from memory, a culture that didn't worship gods, but talked to them, negotiated with them, recorded them. Whatever the truth, the Vatican acted fast. The place is now off limits. Satellite images are blocked. Files are secret. The desert covered it again. But not forever, because sand only hides what memory forgets. And memory is starting to wake up. The first person to look at the manuscript expected dust and brittle old paper. Instead, they found pages that looked like flesh but weren't. Soft and cold, almost unnaturally perfect. Bound in black, shiny skin that seemed to eat light. It didn't reflect it, it absorbed it, as if it knew what it was hiding. The symbols inside weren't hieroglyphs. Not exactly. They had the shape of Egyptian writing, but not the structure. They curved in impossible ways. Some seemed designed to move, others trembled to the touch, like heat waves rising from stone. Language experts tried to classify them. Greek origins, maybe? No. Phoenician? No. Sumerian? Closer, but still wrong. This wasn't just an old language. It was one that had been wiped out. One that didn't grow into anything else, lost or destroyed. One specialist said it looked like pre-dynastic communication. But the problem with that idea was that pre-dynastic Egyptians didn't write. They drew. They painted. They didn't bind books in black skin and carve spells in the margins because that's what they were. Spells, ceremonies, not prayers, instructions. Some pages were written backwards, not mirrored, as if they were meant to be looked at by something from the other side. Others had no beginning or end, just endless circles of text that trapped your eyes until you looked away or felt sick. There were no section breaks, no explanations, just symbols layered over other symbols, each page more mysterious than the last. What bothered people most wasn't their inability to translate, but that some parts seemed familiar. A symbol that looked like a twisted ankh, a line similar to the Hebrew aleph, but stretched as if in pain. Parts of different languages and times squeezed together as if trying to speak with one voice. A voice no one wanted to hear. Then there were the margins filled with tiny drawings, not decorations, documentary pictures of temples that don't exist on any map, sky diagrams of moons and stars orbiting in empty space, and faces, Countless faces, but none had eyes, just empty sockets. Each face stared right at you from the page. Each seemed to know you were there. The Vatican declared the book unstable. They said it wasn't safe to keep in the main archives, that it had to be locked away in an underground vault usually used for cursed items and forbidden texts. But the real reason was simpler. No one could figure it out. Yet, every person who tried saw something different, as if the book changed depending on the reader. One scholar lost his sight after 3 days of looking at it. Another insisted he heard the pages breathing at night. A third simply disappeared. All that was left was his diary, and on the last page were 4 words written. "It's not a book." The first translator was a professor from Milan. Quiet, careful, known for his research on old languages that no one else could understand. When the manuscript arrived in his office, he thought it was just another interesting thing. He opened it, wrote down his observations. He spent 4 nights trying to match the writing to anything in his records. On the 5th night, his housekeeper found him unconscious on the floor. No injuries, no wounds. His heart had simply stopped beating. The last thing he had written on his desk was a single sentence, underlined twice. Not meant for us. A week later, a Vatican linguist took over. He was younger, arrogant. He trusted science, not old stories. He laughed at the idea of a curse. He lasted 2 days. A security guard found him slumped over the manuscript, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-sentence. His lips were red. They said it looked like he had bitten his tongue. The manuscript was spotless, but someone had scribbled a warning on the margin with fresh blood. "Don't wake it." By then people were whispering. Archivists refused to go near it. A nun claimed she heard voices coming from the vault. Not singing, not prayers, just breathing. Deep, slow breaths, as if something sleeping was listening, watching. A third translator was brought from Cairo. She was quiet, distant. She said she had imagined the manuscript long before she saw it. She didn't try to translate it. Instead, she traced the symbols with her fingertips and said they felt warm, alive. She lasted 3 hours. The study room cameras recorded her staring at a page without blinking. Then, as if controlled, she stood up, walked to the wall and began carving symbols with her own blood. When the guards intervened, she collapsed. Her last word was a whisper. "Return." The Vatican enforced silence. No media, no revelations. They claimed the deaths were accidents natural. But privately, panic was spreading. This wasn't just an old book. It was acting. It was spreading. Theories circulated among scholars that it wasn't meant to be read. People said the markings were like a key, that reading them would unleash something that had been held back for a reason. Some started to think it was a test, that the book only let certain people read it without bad things happening, people who had a forgotten past, a special family line. Others said it was a warning, not about history but about what's coming, that figuring it out was like lighting a match in a room full of sleeping beasts. After the 3rd death, the Vatican hid the manuscript deep in its archives, behind steel doors and layers of salt and prayers. They said it was to keep it safe, but some think it was out of fear, because whatever is in that book doesn't want to be read, and maybe it never did. They don't wear special collars, they don't carry crosses, and they don't answer questions, but everyone in the Vatican knows what they mean. When the Jesuit recovery team is sent out, it means something dangerous has shown up again. Something very old. Something that needs to disappear again. The team isn't written down in any official records. They aren't part of any public group. But inside the Vatican walls, they have a name. Custodes Silenti, the guardians of silence. They're picked from Jesuit schools. They're taught more than just religious studies. These men learn forgotten languages, dead alphabets, and how to spot forbidden symbols before anyone else. Their training includes mind control, emergency exorcism steps, and how to get rid of whole books without leaving any proof. When deaths linked to the manuscript started happening more and more, the Vatican didn't send a scholar. They sent the team. The plane was ready in just a few hours. Cairo. The goal wasn't to study the manuscript, it was to get it back. Quietly. Forever. They arrived under the cover of darkness. Silent figures moved in the dark, leaving no trace. At dawn, the museum director found the break-in. Nothing was stolen, just a display case that had been forced open. No fingerprints, no security camera footage. Only a single feather was left on the cold stone. Dark, shiny, unlike any bird feather on Earth. Before the director realised what was missing, the old book was already safe in a lead-lined box, heading for Vatican airspace. The recovery team didn't stay to explain. They never do. That's their job. To make sure the world forgets what it almost found out about inside the Vatican walls. The manuscript went straight to the secret archives, not the public rooms tourists see, the real storage places, not on any maps. Past protected barriers under old tunnels, past rooms full of forbidden writings, captured beings, and glass surfaces that show things that never happened. The team handed it over without a fuss. They never questioned what it was. They had no reason to. What mattered was keeping it hidden forever. But one team member stayed behind. He was different from the others. Younger, restless, curious. He didn't follow orders like he was supposed to. 3 days later, he disappeared. His name erased from records, his living space sealed. The others heard he went back to religious training, but a nun cleaning the floors said she saw something scribbled on his wall before fresh paint covered it. One simple sentence. This isn't the first time. The Vatican never admitted to the operation, the museum never reported a break-in, and the manuscript, it was kept safe behind steel barriers and covered with holy protections. But the Jesuit order knows the truth, because this wasn't the first time they got it back, and it won't be the last. At first, the manuscript looked like nonsense. Scribbles, strange marks, twisted letters. But looking at it for a long time made it seem like something was watching you. Not just words, but a purpose. As if the old paper knew and was waiting for the right reader. Hidden deep inside the book, tucked away among layers of fake symbols, lay something different. A plan. Spells. Not the fairy tale kind. These were directions, patterns, careful instructions. Instructions to do impossible things. To change the light, to stop shadows, to make time pass differently inside spaces. Each ceremony was drawn so perfectly that it seemed like the person who wrote it had done them. Some spells had small notes next to them, not in Latin, not in Greek. In something older, before writing, even before the first records from Mesopotamia. It looked like Egyptian writing, but warped, twisted, as if it had passed through countless hands. Still, some pictures were clearly recognizable. Rings drawn in ash, bronze daggers dipped in oil, people kneeling before flame-shaped platforms. One special page showed a human shape split into 3 outlines. Each outline had a title, not titles we use, names that would burn to say out loud. Another page had star maps. But these stars didn't match our sky. They made patterns no astronomer could identify, except for one. The main star. It was there, Sirius, the dog star. The ancient Egyptians worshipped it as a doorway. The manuscript seemed to agree. The more scholars looked at it, the more they understood that this wasn't a mystical old book from the Middle Ages. It didn't come from religion, it came before it, before writings, before holy places, before gods had names. This was the original form of what people would eventually call magic. The basic code of faith itself. Some pictures showed how to separate things, not physically, but spiritually. One part described taking away fear from someone's mind and putting it inside objects. Another showed how to make shadows appear without casting them. Not symbols, but real steps. But the most unsettling page had no words. Just a picture. A doorway surrounded by markings, and below it, in red ink, a warning in broken text. Do not open unless it has already arrived. The Vatican stopped any more research. They said magic was too dangerous, never meant for human hands. But not everyone listened. A Jesuit secretly copied the doorway page. He hid it inside the binding of another book and smuggled it out. It said he later tried a ritual, not completely, just the first steps. But something answered. The lights flickered, clocks stopped, and he swore the walls started whispering in a language he didn't know. That was the last anyone saw of him. Only the whispers remain. They weren't mentioned in the pyramids or carved on temple walls. No monuments, no altars, no songs. But buried inside the manuscript was a title that kept showing up like a ghost. The Guardians of the Shadowless Fire. A priesthood from before the pharaohs, before Egypt even existed. A group so secret that even other priests were afraid to mention them. The manuscript not only mentioned them, but it was all about them. The ritual drawings repeatedly had the same mysterious sign, a snake eating a flame that gives off no light. One part described a ceremony in complete darkness where only sound gave light, not torches, not stars, just chants that bent the edges of reality. According to the manuscript, these guardians protected something far more valuable than any crown or royal staff. They didn't serve a god, they served a power, one that came before all the gods, neither good nor bad, just pure. The kind of power that could bend time, erase memories, or open paths between dimensions most people couldn't even imagine existed. Their knowledge wasn't passed down through old scrolls or carvings. It was shared through spoken words. One wrong word could break the spell. That's why they trained from childhood. Raised in silence, covered in ink, their sight blocked, so their minds could see the symbols without needing light. This was the meaning of the title. Shadowless fire, flame without burning, sight without eyes. The manuscript suggested that the pharaohs knew them, that even the most powerful rulers of Egypt feared their quiet power. One story said a young pharaoh tried to trap the guardians, jealous of their wisdom. The next morning he was found on top of the palace, his eyes gone, his mouth sealed with wax from an unknown source. No one challenged them after that. Finally, as Egypt changed and foreign powers took over, the guardians faded from memory. But the manuscript said they didn't die. They went into hiding. Some in empty lands, some in tunnels under forgotten cities waiting, guarding what they called the last word. A phrase so powerful it could destroy everything if spoken by the wrong lips. The Vatican took this part of the manuscript very seriously. Too seriously. Notes in the margins show that whole expeditions were sent to follow the trail. Many never came back. One report, partly burned, mentioned a hidden room under ruined temples. Inside were bones arranged in a spiral and walls covered in black paint. No light, no oxygen. Only one mark remained untouched on the wall. A flame surrounded by eyes with no pupils. Some scholars think the guardians still exist, that they secretly passed down parts of the manuscript. That the Vatican's real reason for locking it away wasn't to protect the public. It was to stop the guardians from getting the rest of it back. The manuscript didn't talk about gods like most religions. It didn't mention worship. No chants, no laws, just contact. The kind that changes everything it touches. According to a section buried deep in the text, gods weren't imagined. They were called upon. Old minds that lived in this world before history existed. They weren't bright heavenly figures. They weren't made of fancy metals or stone. They were something different. Consciousness, awareness, wrapped in a shape. The text describes them as burning consciousness, not fire as we know it. Flame without heat, light that flowed like a liquid and whispered secrets into the bones of those who saw it. That was the original flame, the spark that made humans more than just animals. The manuscript says that long before cities and empires, a group of early humans made contact, not by accident. They had searched, listened. They called themselves the Children of the Embers, and finding it, everything changed. These minds didn't give orders. They gave symbols, visions, ways to change reality using only thought and sound. One part describes a ritual where humans could briefly join with the flame. In that moment, they would see every version of themselves across all possible timelines. Some went crazy, others came back changed. They spoke new languages, drew circles on the ground that made animals freeze. One man would touch a dying plant and bring it back to life, not through prayer, but through memory, because that's what the flame really was. Remembering not just history, but the code underneath it. The true memory of matter, of time, of death. The gods, the manuscript says, weren't there to be worshipped. They were there to be understood. And if you understood them, even for a moment, you could rewrite your own future. This idea scared the Vatican more than any curse or demon, because it wasn't evil. It was knowledge, pure, wild, and it didn't need faith. It gave proof. The Church sent investigators to find out where this flame myth came from. They found cave paintings in Sudan showing humans reaching out to star-shaped figures. No weapons, no thrones, just contact. Some of the same star patterns appeared in the manuscript. The connection was perfect. Thousands of years apart, thousands of miles apart. Same pattern, same spiral, same flame. The last part of that chapter had one line, written in red ink and underlined 3 times. They didn't leave. They became us. This is the part that keeps scholars up at night. Because if the gods were real and merged with early humans, what does that make us now? Maybe the original flame never went out. Maybe we're just waiting to remember. It wasn't written like the others. No diagrams, no chants, just one page surrounded by blank parchment, as if the rest of the book kept its distance. At the top, in writing that glowed even by candlelight, were 5 words. The ritual of remembrance begins. The Vatican translators couldn't figure it out. Unlike other spells, this wasn't about controlling fire or bending space. It wasn't even about power. It was about memory, but not the everyday kind. This was memory that existed outside the brain. Memory passed down through blood, through bone, through time. The ritual claimed that every person carried echoes of past lives. Ancient names, lost cities, conversations in dead languages. But the mind had sealed them away. Too many memories from too many lives would shatter a person's identity, so nature buried them deep where they couldn't be reached. Until now. The spell required no herbs or sacrifices, only silence. A circle of obsidian dust and a phrase whispered backward while staring into a fire-lit mirror. Simple, yet dangerous, because once the door opened it wouldn't close until the memories were done with you. The manuscript warned that time would begin to slip. You might wake up thinking it was 3,000 years ago, or speak in languages no one around you understood. Some who attempted the ritual forgot their own names, but remembered ones they hadn't heard for millennia. One marginal note was especially chilling. It remembered being buried alive, but not this life, the one before. A Vatican researcher secretly tried the spell. He disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he was shaking, repeating the same phrase in Coptic, over and over. I was there when the library burned. I was there when the skies turned black. I was there when the gods fell. The church tried to dismiss it, called it a delusion, but they found no substance in his system. And when they consulted a Coptic historian, they were stunned. The phrase he kept repeating used a grammatical structure that hadn't existed in any surviving texts. It was older, purer, a version only a native speaker from 2,000 years ago would have known. The Vatican sealed the page under glass, labelled it too unstable for further translation, but not before making several copies. Copies made in secret for internal use. Some believe the ritual still circulates in fragments, whispered in clandestine meetings, recited in dark chambers by those seeking to remember what the world forced them to forget. They say it can restore not just memory, but skill. Abilities from past lives, lost knowledge, ancient strength. But the real risk isn't remembering who you were. It's forgetting who you are. It shouldn't have existed. Not in Rome, not in the modern world. But it was there, locked behind thick leaded glass deep within the Vatican's lower archives. No indicator, no description. Just a small black object sitting on marble. It looked like a medallion, but older, heavier, carved entirely from obsidian, and etched into the centre was a symbol that matched only one thing: the forbidden manuscript. The seal had only been mentioned once in the text, a marginal note, barely a paragraph. It was called the Seal of Ammon, not the Ammon seen in Egyptian temples. This version was from before the temples, before the pharaohs, when God still moved in the shadows. According to the manuscript, the seal wasn't a symbol of power. It was a lock, a spiritual barrier designed to contain something that couldn't be destroyed, something that still pulsed with energy. The text described it as a safeguard. If the manuscript's rituals were ever misused, the seal would activate. Not with fire or sound, but with oblivion. It would erase the memory of the spell itself from nearby minds. Entire ceremonies instantly lost. Whole languages wiped from human consciousness. The seal didn't destroy knowledge, it hid it. No one knew how the Vatican acquired it. Some say it was unearthed near Thebes and quietly moved by a Jesuit agent. Others think they had it in their possession for centuries, even before the manuscript surfaced. What surprised researchers most wasn't its material or its shape. It was the fact that the seal still worked. Archive security footage showed something unusual. Every week, a priest would descend into the crypt with a notebook. He would observe the seal for minutes, write something, then leave. But when researchers examined the notebook, every page was blank. Not erased, just blank. As if the pen had never touched the paper. Even more unsettling, the priest had no memory of his visits. When asked about the seal, he seemed puzzled, said he'd never heard of it. That's when they realised it wasn't just a legend. The seal was active, and it was doing exactly what the manuscript said it would. Later, tests showed faint electromagnetic pulses around the object, but with no power source. It pulsed at irregular intervals, almost as if it was responding to something or someone. One researcher claimed the seal hummed when certain phrases from the manuscript were spoken aloud. They stopped reading after that. The Vatican now keeps the seal under constant surveillance. Not because they fear someone will steal it, but because they fear someone will remember what it's for. Because if the seal still works, it means the threat it was meant to contain might still be real, waiting, listening just beneath the surface. They didn't announce it, no press release, no memo, just a red wax seal on the manuscript's container and a single Latin phrase etched beneath it in iron letters. Mundus periculosus, the dangerous world. Initially no one understood its meaning. Was it a title, a warning, a name for the manuscript, or something that described its contents? But then a quiet directive came from above. All translation work was to cease immediately. Copies were to be incinerated, notes destroyed. Any research involving the manuscript was to be classified, and academics assigned to the project were reassigned without explanation. It wasn't just censorship, it felt like containment. The few who had read portions of the text before the lockdown began started to whisper. They said the manuscript didn't just describe lost magic or forgotten rituals. It described a completely different version of reality. A reality where language could bend matter. where memory could shape the present, where ancient beings weren't worshipped because they were gods, but because they were terrifyingly powerful scientists who once ruled Earth like a living laboratory. The Vatican had had enough. Somewhere between the chapters on resurrection and the section on mirrored time, someone high up decided the truth was too dangerous. Not just spiritually, but structurally. If people believed this manuscript, it could destroy not just faith, but the very fabric of what we call history. That's when they changed the classification from historical artifact to theological threat. Even the name they gave it, Mundus Periculosus, wasn't chosen at random. It came from a suppressed text written in the 14th century by a monk who claimed to have had visions of the world beneath this one. A place not of fire or punishment, but of knowledge too dense for the human mind to bear. According to him, accessing this world meant risking madness, or worse, remembering what humanity had chosen to forget for its own safety. The phrase had only appeared once in Vatican records before. Now it was back, stamped on a manuscript, wrapped in obsidian leather, and filled with words no one wanted to read aloud anymore. Behind the scenes, a different kind of order was unfolding. The crypt's security was increased. Academics who had glimpsed even small portions of the ancient text found themselves transferred to remote locations or forced into long leaves of absence. It's rumoured that one tried to recreate a ceremony from what he remembered and spent 3 full days speaking in languages from a long-extinct civilization before collapsing from sheer exhaustion. These days, no one openly discusses the document. People refer to it only by abbreviations or code names. The manuscript, the fire text, the Book of Forgetting. And yet, anyone who has worked in those hallowed halls knows precisely what lies hidden and what power it holds. The Church didn't seal it away because the contents were made up. They buried it because the revelations might be real. And when truth is buried deep enough, it doesn't just disappear. It hides, and occasionally it calls. The discovery was hidden in the margins, not in the main document itself, but within the Vatican's internal paperwork. A casual mention, barely worth a footnote in archives dealing with the categorization of relics. 3 Latin words scribbled in tight handwriting. Ordo Obscure, Eclipsi, the Brotherhood of the Eclipse. No one working in the archives had ever heard of this name before. It didn't appear in any of the established religious orders. It was missing from Jesuit lists, absent from Dominican records, and even excluded from the infamous list of forbidden books. Yet its mark kept resurfacing, stamped in reports on Egyptian antiquities, hastily written in notes related to restricted archive permits, and consistently linked to one central purpose: the eradication of mystical wisdom. Most see the Vatican purely as a spiritual institution, but operating in the shadows, it serves a completely different function. Not everything is preserved for posterity. Certain things are hidden. Particular truths are suppressed. This is precisely where the Brotherhood of the Eclipse operates. Based on recovered evidence, this clandestine group wasn't established to safeguard religious beliefs, but to preserve the facade of accepted history. Their emblem was elegantly simple: a dark circle containing only a sliver of light, an eclipse, a reality intentionally obscured. The Brotherhood dates back to at least the 1600s, though some experts suspect it originated much earlier, potentially shortly after the conquest of Constantinople. Its purpose was to locate all writings, relics, and oral traditions related to what they called prescriptural influence. In plain English, Egyptian sorcery. Specifically, anything concerning the keepers of eternal darkness. These weren't religious brothers. They weren't even conventional priests. They were skilled academics, expert linguists, and on occasion spiritual warriors. Their responsibility went beyond merely hiding objects. They existed to destroy understanding, alter interpretations, insert misleading notes, mistranslate crucial passages, ensuring that even if someone discovered fragments of reality, they would never comprehend what they were truly examining. A stolen report described one of their missions in Egypt during the Great War. A secret chamber was discovered beneath a ruined shrine. Inside lay papyrus scrolls that predated the earliest dynasties by hundreds of years. A team member made the fatal mistake of vocalizing a partially deciphered hieroglyph. He died within hours. The remaining scrolls were incinerated, the site was deliberately flooded, and the sole surviving operative returned to Rome carrying only a phrase etched into granite. They remembered everything. The Brotherhood's tactics were methodical. They didn't just remove things from existence, they ensured those things would be erased from memory. Texts rewritten, burial sites relocated. Legends turned into moral stories. They realized something most organizations missed, that the true strength of ancient Egypt wasn't in its massive structures. It was contained in its collective memory, and the eclipse existed to wipe that clean. Even today, the Vatican refuses to confirm the Brotherhood's existence, but its symbol continues to appear, still stamped on particular containers, still whispered about in forbidden libraries. Because certain darknesses never fade, some shadows were created to last eternally, and if the Brotherhood is still operating, it suggests they believe the threat hasn't passed. It's simply been dormant, they claim. It isn't actually a word in any traditional sense, not in the way we normally understand language. It's more like a resonance held within breath, a tone that shapes the very fabric around it. Within the manuscript, hidden deep among sketches of mirrored pyramids and diagrams of unseen dimensions, there's a section that discusses the original name of the divine, not the familiar ones from worship or holy books, not Yahweh or Adonai, or even the sacred 4 letters. This was something older, something hidden, something deliberately erased. The section is etched with mind-bending symbols, characters that curve inward and alter shape depending on your viewing perspective. Academics debated for countless weeks whether it should be read from beginning to end or end to beginning, but one element became undeniable. The name it referred to wasn't merely a designation, it was a tool. The text explains that this name was uttered only once at the dawn of creation, a sound so perfect that it not only resonated through existence but established it. Reality, dimension, energy, substance, everything aligned around this single utterance. It served as the fundamental blueprint of existence, and then it vanished. Some argue it was hidden by divine beings to protect us. Others think it was stolen from humanity because we weren't ready, but the manuscript suggests something different, that the name still exists, just beyond the temporal limits, like a wavelength we've lost the ability to detect, and that anyone who remembers it could change everything. Not through supernatural means, through remembrance. The Vatican labelled this part of the manuscript as the most spiritually dangerous section. Because if it was accurate, then the divine isn't some far-off entity, but a formula. And if that formula can be spoken, then reality can be restructured. Not in stories, but in real time. This prospect horrified them. A marginal note from a Vatican interpreter described a recurring dream. After transcribing the sound structure of the name, he claimed to have dreamed of a vast library that contained no volumes, only reverberations. And each reverberation repeated identical words in various timbres. Speak it, and existence will be lost. Another cleric went further. He attempted to pronounce the initial sound, just that first part. Observers reported that the atmosphere around him shattered like glass. He fell unconscious and never spoke another word. The institution acted quickly. That section of the manuscript was locked behind multiple barriers. The pronunciation instructions were removed. Even the writing fluid used in the original text was examined. It contained a dye found nowhere else in documented history, as if the page itself resisted being remembered. But some think parts of the name still exist, hidden in traditional chants, in designs carved into sacred places and carried on desert breezes. Fragments of a mystery destined to remain divided, because if the full name were vocalized again, time might collapse, reality might shake, and we might find ourselves existing not in our familiar world, but in the one before it, the realm shaped by that single utterance. In sanctuaries that predate recorded history and burial chambers carved deep into cliffs, ancient Egyptians depicted their deities with features that match nothing human. Elongated skulls, globes like flaming stars, incredibly thin and unnaturally numerous fingers. These weren't mere stylized illustrations. The specifics were too uniform across generations. Different ruling periods, different kings, identical forms, identical unusual measurements, identical gaze. The globes were consistently what drew attention first. Enormous, perpetually open, seemingly luminous. Some showed radiating lines like focused beams. Others showed circular patterns similar to optical devices caught mid-focus. They weren't representations of sight. They were representations of observation. And they appeared consistently. But what were they observing? Some theorized these depictions weren't deities at all, that they represented something else entirely. Travelers, perhaps, or entities from a dimension not above us, but alongside what we perceive as reality. Academics dismissed this for decades, arguing the artwork was metaphorical, insisting cranial forms were cultural preferences or binding practices. But no one could justify why noble offspring displayed identical features, or why specific preserved remains revealed skulls that couldn't belong to modern humans. The manuscript doesn't identify them, it simply calls them those who came when the illumination moved. It states that they didn't communicate through speech, but through consciousness. That they instructed ancient priests to align sacred structures with celestial roots invisible to others. They created maps of subterranean places and beyond the heavens, destinations no one has been able to locate since. Some carvings depict them holding unusual instruments. Not ceremonial staffs or crosses, but rods ending in spirals or globes. A mural shows a deity pressing a glowing disc against a human's forehead, as if to transfer knowledge, and the human's globes turn golden. There's a story hidden in a lost, sacred chant. It speaks of a ruler who looked into the globes of one of these beings and remembered something. Not a previous existence, a previous reality. A realm where matter yielded and illumination possessed substance. He dedicated his remaining years to attempting to return, and upon his death he asked to be buried face down towards the constellations. Vatican archives reference similar entities in documents held in the Jesuit collection, different titles, identical globes, always observing, always silent. Some researchers believe the elongated skulls and luminous globes represented more than just physical traits. They were harbingers, portents, perhaps suggesting we weren't the pioneers, that another consciousness once graced this world and left fragments of itself, not in technology, but in remembrance. And if those watchful gazes persist, perhaps they're anticipating whether we will remember what we saw when we initially looked back. Before the dust concealed it, before centuries obscured it, before we forgot that powerful deities may never have been divine, simply gazes that never rest. Hidden somewhere in the ancient text, beneath layers of coded glyphs and faded ink, lies a solitary crumpled manuscript. It's not an invocation, it's not a warning, it's a map. But not of terrain or celestial bodies. It's known as the geography of the soul, and what it sets out to map isn't a place, it's the spirit. In pharaonic Egyptian understanding, the soul was a component of human essence, the component that held memory, desire, individuality. The component that remained after death. Most believed it simply stayed beside the burial chamber, but this blueprint reveals something far more intricate. Directions, passages, loops and spirals. It resembles a labyrinth, but it's not accidental. Every angle seems intentional, every pathway bounded by glyphs that repeat in shrines, papyri, and visions. At the top of the blueprint, a small figure stands within it. A human outline. That is existence. Common conscious existence. But a few steps down, the form begins to dissolve, and the spirit begins to detach. The blueprint depicts the essence entering something called the realm of contemplation, a dimension between cognition and departure. In this dimension, you don't just remember your existence, you remember alternate existences, the ones you lived before, the ones you might live again. Further down the path, peculiar and mysterious titles emerge. The Chamber of Reflections, the stream that flows backward, the sanctuary without entrances. Each is designated with glyphs that correspond to discoveries in tomb carvings and on sarcophagus lids. But they were never arranged in sequence like this, never linked as an expedition. The text implies that this wasn't just legend, it was a guide. Academics who have examined the blueprint say it resembles a kind of mental instruction manual, that it's not simply about dying, but about how to navigate memory itself, how to reach the deep layers of consciousness where time folds in on itself, places where dreams become passwords. One Vatican scholar noted a constantly repeated phrase, "He who understands the foundation fears not the cycle." It suggests that death isn't a conclusion, it's a circuit, a mechanism, and that with the right wisdom the spirit can choose its path. It doesn't need to lose its memory. It doesn't need to start over. What makes this even more unsettling is that sections of the blueprint align with contemporary neuroimaging. The spiral at the center of the diagram mirrors the formation of the hippocampus, the brain region linked to memory. How could a blueprint drawn millennia ago possess that knowledge? Perhaps the guardians of the eternal flame weren't mere clerics. Perhaps they were travellers, not of territory or ocean, but of consciousness. Perhaps they mapped the spirit the same way astronomers mapped constellations, not because they feared death, but because they sought to retrieve something, a memory, a communication, or perhaps, just perhaps, an escape from the pattern. The Vatican keeps the blueprint sealed, not because it's dangerous to observe, but because once you perceive the path, you begin to identify it. In dreams, in moments of familiarity, in the stillness between your cognitions. As if it's perpetually present, waiting for your remembrance. In the final part of the text, immediately after a segment filled with strange illustrations of flameless torches and floating gazes, there's something that doesn't resemble an invocation or a warning. It resembles a path, a vertical path, 7 levels stacked one on top of the other, joined by thin rays of illumination. At the top, something blinding. At the bottom, something shattered. The manuscript calls it the Ladder of Enlightenment. Unlike other segments filled with glyphs and ciphers, this reads like instructions. Each step of the ladder has a designation. The initial portal is called awareness. The next is remembering, then understanding, then dividing. Beyond that, the designations begin to merge into glyphs too archaic for any recognized language. But the directions are clear. You don't ascend this ladder with your form. You ascend with your intellect. The text describes it as a type of internal elevation, not through worship, not through faith, but through deliberate acts of remembrance. The initial stage is the recognition of your own cognitions, then your memories, then memories that don't feel like your own. The manuscript warns that error is part of the journey, that ascending means dissolving what you believe yourself to be until only the core self remains. The peculiar thing is how similar these stages are to early Christian mystical compositions. In forgotten monastic texts and obscure scriptures never sanctified, there are resonances of this ladder, depictions of a spirit ascending through stages of enlightenment. Saints and hermits spoke of shedding their forms, floating above themselves, witnessing an illumination so bright it possessed mass. Some claimed to have heard melodies without origin. Others claimed that the authentic designations of things had been revealed to them. The Egyptian text predates these compositions by centuries, but the imagery is corresponding. The ladder, the illumination, the steps formed by remembrance and stillness. Some believe the early congregation didn't create its mysticism, it inherited it and concealed the source. The Vatican's confidential observations on this segment mention a monk named Erasmus who attempted the full elevation. His compositions were seized, his cell sealed. He had written that the ladder wasn't metaphor, that the intellect, when pushed to its limit through isolation and particular phrases whispered rhythmically, could disconnect. He called it the sweet exit. He claimed to have seen the top of the ladder, and what existed there didn't resemble heaven. It resembled a reflection. The idea that the spirit can ascend through levels of the self until it finds itself is ancient but dangerous because it requires no cleric or congregation or even a deity, only a technique, only the correct sequence of cognitions, breath and stillness. The text doesn't call it salvation, it calls it harmony, the instant when illumination recognizes illumination and the ladder vanishes. Because you realize it was never a construct. It was a reflection of where you already existed, of who you always were. Deep beneath Vatican City, far below the marble surfaces and gilded ceilings, there's a level of the archives that doesn't appear on any official map. Most people know about the Vatican Library, and some even whisper about the secret archives, but almost no one outside the highest circles has heard of the dark repository. Its true designation is inscribed in Latin above the sealed entrance. Anima externa, the outer spirit. It's not a chamber, it's a succession of rooms, each colder than the last. The barriers are thick and damp, reinforced with stone from the original catacombs. Access is limited to a handful of individuals who wear no identifications, only positions. The keys aren't electronic. They're ancient, carved from bone and volcanic glass, kept in containers, protected like sacred weapons. Inside the repository. The church doesn't keep gospels or confessions. It keeps dangers, scrolls too perilous to be removed, artifacts too powerful to be displayed. Among them are items that don't match any known era of Christian history. Scrolls covered in primitive hieroglyphs, scarabs preserved in golden amber, and a mirror so old that the silver has vanished from the glass, leaving a reflection that always seems to observe. One document is labelled simply Ritius Luxor. It describes ceremonies performed in the shadow of the Temple of Ammon, long before the birth of Christ. The ceremonies involve glyphs etched into the flesh using dark oil and gold dust. They were said to unlock portals of memory in the spirit, allowing communication with something called the voice from below. The Vatican's marginal observations describe these practices as theological blasphemy, but acknowledge that attempts to duplicate them caused unexplained effects on subjects. Another item is a sealed container holding what appears to be a dried tongue. The inscription states it once belonged to a cleric who uttered the initial word, a sound not meant for the human throat. Those who heard it reported losing all sense of time. Some thought they had died. Others thought they had never been born. Why would the Vatican keep these items instead of destroying them? That's the question no one can answer. One idea is that they don't dare, that getting rid of such items might awaken the very forces that were meant to stay buried. Another is simpler, that the church doesn't keep them out of fear, they keep them out of curiosity, not to protect the world from ancient Egyptian magic, but to learn from it, to use it. The most chilling thing is a letter tucked away deep in one folder. Written by a cardinal in the 18th century, it states that the ceremonies of the Egyptians are older than the transgression. If Christ is the key, they are the mechanism, and we must never allow them to turn. So the dark vault stays locked. Its light flickers but never goes out. And inside it, history holds its breath, waiting for someone to ask the wrong question. Or maybe the right one. The one that unravels everything. There's a page in the text that scholars still whisper about in private. It's not long, maybe a few hundred words, but what it describes unsettles even the most seasoned researchers. It's a ceremony, so strange, so precise, that even those well-versed in Egyptian mysticism hesitate to speak its name aloud. The manuscript calls it the calling of the reflection, and it centers on an object called the Mirror of Ra. Unlike most mirrors made of bronze or glass, this one is carved from a single slab of volcanic glass, dark as night and polished to reflect not just your face, but something else, something deeper. The passage warns that the mirror is not meant for vanity or beauty. It is a tool, a key to summon the authentic self, a version of you that exists outside of time, stripped of memory, fear, and illusion. The ceremony itself is simple in appearance, but terrifying in intent. It must be done alone, in a darkened room with no hieroglyphs, no lighting, no distractions. The volcanic glass mirror must be placed at eye level. The participant stares into it and recites a single phrase written in primitive hieroglyphs. No one has fully translated the phrase, but a rough approximation means, "I take off my disguise." What happens next is where the accounts begin to fragment. Some say the mirror shows not a reflection, but a shadow that moves independently. Others say it reveals forgotten memories, moments you've tried to bury so deeply your own intellect forgot they existed. Some claim that if you look long enough the mirror flickers, not you, it. The Vatican's dossier on the Mirror of Ra includes a warning scrawled in red ink. The subject is not trustworthy. After the ceremony, that single sentence has led to countless theories. What does it mean to summon your authentic self? And why would that self be dangerous? In Egyptian legend, Ra is the sun deity, the one who journeys through the underworld each night to fight chaos and re-emerge in the morning. But this ceremony has nothing to do with the sun. It's about darkness. It's about facing what lives beneath your surface. One clergyman's observations, written in shaky Latin, describe a test subject who performed the ceremony and claimed to have woken up afterward. When asked what that meant, the subject simply said, "I was asleep before. This is the real world." No one could explain why his voice sounded strangely resonant in the recording, or why his gaze didn't match pre-ceremony photos. Since then, the Vatican has kept the Mirror of Ra under lock and key, not destroyed, just sealed away. Perhaps they're afraid of what it might reveal. Or perhaps they already tried it once and didn't like what they saw. Because the scariest thing in the world isn't a demon or a ghost. It's the truth staring you in the face and the realization that it's not you at all. There's a passage buried deep in the text that doesn't talk about gods, spells, or secret artifacts. It talks about oblivion, not the kind that comes from old age or trauma or the passage of time. No, this was something else. A ceremony, a deliberate act. And if what the manuscript claims is true, then much of what we've lost from the ancient world wasn't swept away by fire or conflict. It was purposefully erased. The manuscript describes something called the Pillars of Oblivion. According to the text, these weren't physical columns like stone monuments or towers. They were instants, events, carefully constructed and established ceremonies performed by clerics who worshipped no deity but served a darker purpose. Keepers of silence. Their role wasn't to remember, it was to make the world forget. The ceremony took place in certain sacred locations, usually beneath shrines or near water. A group would gather, always 7, always masked. The person whose memory was the target would be brought forward, sometimes willingly, sometimes not. A chant would be intoned, not loud, but slow and steady, like a lullaby for the spirit. Then one of the masked clerics would whisper a word into the subject's ear. Just one word. The text never reveals what the word was, only that once spoken, the oblivion began. The person would start to lose things, not just names or faces, but places, skills, entire lives. And here's where it gets even stranger. The ceremony didn't just erase, their memories. It changed the memories of everyone who knew them. Families would wake up feeling something was missing, but couldn't quite say what. Scrolls would fade, paintings would blur, as if the universe itself had agreed to forget along with them. If this seems impossible, consider this. Archaeologists have uncovered Egyptian shrines that reference ceremonies with no known purpose, hieroglyphs that don't appear in any other writing, motifs of 7 faded masks painted on barriers beneath layers of plaster. And every time a clue is found, it's always near a water source, just as the text claims. The Vatican allegedly attempted to recreate the ceremony in a controlled environment around the 1940s. The experiment was classified, but one of the surviving documents contains a chilling phrase. It states, the subject forgot not only who he was, but that he ever existed. Imagine, not just loss of memory, but loss of existence. It poses a terrifying question. What if some of our greatest thinkers, artists, prophets, or inventors were simply unmade, not by fate or accident, but by design? What if the past we're trying to unearth is filled with deliberate gaps, holes precisely carved so we never ask the right questions? The text claims the pillars were eventually dismantled, but not destroyed, just hidden. Perhaps in vaults, perhaps in ruins, or perhaps within us, locked behind doors we don't know how to open. Not yet, anyway. There's something strange about the way authority is adorned. Crowns, robes, rings, they're not just decorations, they're symbols. And symbols always have a story, even if we've forgotten where they came from. Take the mitre, for example, that tall split headdress worn by bishops during ceremonies. Most people think it's just part of religious tradition, but the text offers a very different story, tracing the mitre back to the burning sands of ancient Egypt, to a serpent-shaped crown. The serpent crown wasn't made of gold or jewels, it was made of belief. Worn by the high clerics of Amun, it curved upward and split at the top, mimicking the open mouth of a cobra. The serpent in Egyptian magic represented knowledge, rebirth, and hidden power. Wearing the crown meant channeling those forces. It wasn't just a headdress, it was a tool, a kind of spiritual antenna. Now here's where it gets unsettling. When early Christian bishops began adopting ceremonial headwear, the design they settled on wasn't random. The mitre mirrors the same split shape, the upward curve, the symbolism of something rising from the forehead. Some scholars claim it was just aesthetic, that it was about visibility during Mass, but the text claims otherwise. It suggests that early bishops weren't just borrowing Egyptian styles, they were repurposing Egyptian ceremonies. According to a hidden passage, the early bishops of Alexandria were trained in both Christian and Egyptian rites. They understood the spiritual weight of the serpent crown and adapted it to Christian liturgy. But instead, of course, of calling it magic, they called it divine authority. Instead of invoking Amun, they spoke of Christ. Yet, the energy flowing through the mitre remained the same. It was about control, not just of people, but of memory and mystery. At some point, the origin story was intentionally buried. The Vatican archives supposedly contain drawings showing the evolution of the crown through the centuries, from serpent head to bishop's mitre, and hidden among those pages are warnings that the glyph still holds power, that whoever wears it must be careful what they carry in their thoughts during Mass, because the crown does not forget. Even today, some high-ranking clerics refuse to wear the mitre, not for fashion reasons, but for what it might awaken. There are whispers of clerics who, while wearing it, began to speak in ancient tongues or see visions of shrines that no longer exist, as if the headpiece remembered every head it had rested upon, including those that served deities far older than the congregation. So the next time you see a bishop raise his hands in blessing, look at the shape on his head. You're not just seeing a hat, you're seeing the ghost of a serpent, a reminder of a time when magic was real and authority was worn like a crown. Some stories are too familiar. A man perishes and rises again. Water turns to wine. Light overcomes darkness. But what if those stories weren't new? What if they were borrowed from something much older? Something buried deep beneath the sands of Egypt? The text doesn't whisper it, it proclaims it. Page after page, filled with glyphs and ceremonies that seem almost identical to Christianity. But they come from shrines that crumbled long before the Gospels were written. There's a passage in the text that lists 7 rites used by a forgotten priesthood in Upper Egypt. The first is a purification with water. The second involves oil. The third, a sacred meal eaten in silence. And the 7th, a ceremonial death and return staged in a dark chamber beneath a stone altar. The structure is almost identical to the sacraments that are still practiced in congregations today. But here's the kicker. These rites were recorded more than 1,000 years before the time of Christ. It doesn't stop there. The text describes robes sewn with specific patterns marked with crosses, suns, and gazes, glyphs used by the clerics of the Osiris shrine. One ancient garment shows a scarf, wrapped 3 times around the waist, mirroring the cords found in specific Christian monastic traditions. There are even sketches of the Ankh, the Egyptian symbol of life raised in blessing. Its shape bears a striking resemblance to the cross, but crowned with a circular loop. Christian missionaries who arrived in Egypt occasionally used this symbol, mistaking it for a regional variant of the crucifix. Perhaps they recognized exactly what it stood for and gambled on the ignorance of others. The document describes this fusion as the Great Occultation, a historical moment when one belief system was layered over another. When sacred sites became churches, when deities became saints, and when symbols that were once used to channel primal forces were relabeled as sacred ornaments. Even the Christian halo, that luminous circle encircling the heads of saints, appears in Egyptian burial chambers as a solar disk crowning their deities. It represented divine essence, centuries before it signified holiness. And here lies what Vatican officials prefer to remain unspoken. The manuscript indicates that this was not an organic development. It wasn't an accidental overlap. It was a calculation, a methodical, intentional movement to absorb Egypt's spiritual framework and obscure its true origins beneath layers of religious teaching. So, when common people bowed in worship, they were unconsciously repeating ceremonies that were once offered to Isis, Horus, or Amun. Several early church leaders voiced their concern about this, that too many believers continued to think through Egyptian concepts, that although the temples had crumbled, their essence persisted within the new customs of the church. Even that correspondence was hidden, stored in forgotten monastery niches, and misfiled under obscure references. The manuscript calls it appropriated sanctity, a theft not of treasures or artifacts, but of memory. Because if populations remembered the origins of these practices, they might start asking different questions, and certain establishments were founded to ensure they never would. In an inconspicuous section of the manuscript, hidden beneath pages of annotations and warnings, lies a ceremony described simply as communion. It doesn't draw attention, it almost seems deliberately overlooked. But those who have discovered it claim it reads like a guide to something primal, something forbidden. A technique for accessing voices long believed silenced, not symbolically, but actually. The ceremony begins with quiet, not just silence, stillness, the kind where your own breath seems deafening. You stand in absolute darkness within a room marked with carved eyes and endless spirals. A ring of obsidian dust is drawn around you. In the centre, an artifact must rest. Not just any object. It must have belonged to those who have passed away. A fragment of bone, a tooth, perhaps a garment, something that still holds memory. The manuscript emphasizes this point. Memory dwells in substance. Then the incantation begins. These aren't just words. They're like frequencies, tones and echoes that go up and down like breathing. The symbols used to write them don't match any language we know, but when scientists played them through special frequency machines, they felt vibrations inside their chests. One person even said they heard their grandma's voice whispering their name, and no one laughed. What's really strange is how much this sounds like something much more common, like how Christians worship relics, which are bones of saints kept in fancy gold boxes. People gather around them to pray, ask for advice, and feel closer to God. But the church said this was just a way of thinking, a symbol of holiness. This old book says something different. It says, the bones. Remember, things can hold voices just like wax holds fingerprints. If you do the ceremony right, you won't just remember the person who passed away. You'll hear them speak. There's a secret Vatican paper that talks about a monk who did this ritual by himself in the crypts under an Italian church. He came out 3 days later, bruised and shaking. He couldn't speak for hours. When he finally did, he kept writing the same phrase over and over. They remain present. He was sent to a faraway monastery in the mountains. No one knows what happened to him. The early church tried to get rid of this idea. They changed the ritual to worshipping relics under their watch. They told people to ask for things, not to listen, to worship, not to remember. Because if people found out that the dead could talk, they might wonder what else was hidden and what these voices might say if they were finally allowed to finish their stories. The old book ends the ritual with the final instructions. Once you hear the voice, you must break the circle. Burn the relic and forget the words, because staying connected for too long slowly makes the living person weaker. Talking to them is safe, but only for a short time. Some people say the ritual is just a story. Others say it's been done in secret for many years. But one thing is clear. Memory, in old times, wasn't just thinking. It was being there, a voice, an echo, hidden deep in the old book. Among old star charts and spells written in dead languages, there's a part that seems out of place. It shows a holy place. Not in Jerusalem, not in Rome, but in Philae, the island where the amazing temple of Isis was. And inside that holy place, something amazing was supposed to happen. The book talks about bright beings coming down on golden beams of light. Their eyes weren't human. Their faces flickered like flames. Their wings, yes, wings, were made of something like liquid glass and moved silently. The priests called them flame bearers. Others called them heavenly voices. But these descriptions make you wonder. These weren't Egyptian gods in the usual way. They were something different, something older, or maybe even newer. And the word used to describe them in the notes on the side, written by someone later, changes everything. Malachim, angels. That word doesn't belong in old Egyptian writings. It comes from Hebrew and means messenger. In Christian texts, angels bring warnings, carry out God's orders, or protect holy people. But in this story, these beings aren't just messengers, they are teachers. The old book says they taught the priests of Isis how to turn sound into power, how to open up their minds like a doorway, how to leave their bodies without dying. Inside the temple, they weren't worshipped, they were followed. The priests built underground rooms where these beings would appear. The carvings found near the site matched the descriptions in the text. Winged shapes with bright halos, arms outstretched, eyes that glowed like suns, and always a circle behind them with symbols no one could read. Even stranger, some carvings were deliberately chipped away a long time ago, replaced with normal pictures. It's like someone tried to erase these visitors from memory. But they missed some, and when these remaining carvings were looked at next to early Christian angel art, the similarities were clear. The old book also talks about a ceremony. It was called the Ascension of the Flame, a ritual to call these beings during moon eclipses. It needed singing at frequencies that no human throat could naturally make. The text warns against doing it without being ready. One part says, "They only respond to light, but they keep the darkness." That part is circled in red ink in at least 3 copies kept in the Vatican. So, what does it all mean? Were angels always a part of Egyptian spirituality? Or were they something completely different that crossed unexpected lines? The Church has always said that angels are only Christian or Jewish Christian. But if this old book is true, those bright figures in stained glass windows might have first stood under pillars carved with hieroglyphs, guarding not heaven, but something buried much deeper. And maybe, just maybe, they never left. They called it saving, defending, protecting souls. But the truth looks different when you track down lost scrolls, burned libraries, and rewritten papers. Hidden in the archives of European monasteries are reports spanning hundreds of years. Reports of old Egyptian writings quietly disappearing, of whole temples losing their decorations, of texts taken not to be studied, but to be hidden. It didn't start suddenly. At first, the early church just ignored old magic. They dismissed it as silly pagan stuff. But something changed. Something must have changed behind closed doors, because suddenly records show a planned effort, a strategy. From Alexandria to Rome, orders were given. Find any Egyptian document that talks about heavenly bodies, the spirit, or the power of words. Take it out, replace it, get rid of it if you have to. In one document from the 12th century, a Jesuit researcher wrote about getting a scroll called the Breath of Thoth. He wrote about finding it in a sealed room near Luxor and its ideas about bringing back memories and spiritual travel. The scroll went to the Vatican and was never mentioned again. On the side, someone later carved a single warning in Latin. Periculosum est. It is dangerous. Another letter from a 14th century monk complains that texts are being removed from libraries because they're called heresy, only to disappear completely. He describes a special book written with bright ink that seemed to change in candlelight. That book was also taken away. No reason, no return. Eventually, the effort grew stronger. Statues of Egyptian gods were broken, temples were turned into churches. Knowledge that went against the new timeline of creation was called blasphemy. Magic was condemned as evil, and memory, real memory, was replaced by church teachings. Yet here's the strange thing. In private, some church scholars seem to believe that these texts had real power, not just symbolic, but actual power, that the ancient magic of Egypt could open forbidden doors. A papal advisor in the 17th century even warned that one of these doorways had been partly opened. He wrote about seeing voices speaking dead languages, about dreams turning to dust. The fight wasn't just against Egypt, it was against the memory of Egypt, against a time when humans walked alongside bright beings, when the soul was mapped like the stars, when words themselves could reshape reality. The Church's goal wasn't just to stop these memories. They wanted to make sure no one even thought to ask the questions. Maybe that's the most terrifying part. The biggest danger wasn't what they hid. It was what they purposely erased. On purpose. Because if memory is power, then erasing it becomes control, and whoever controls our memories might control our future. It started with a mistake. A blurry photo uploaded to a hidden online forum late at night. Just a torn, old and damaged page, showing strange symbols that didn't match any known alphabet. Most people who saw it just ignored it, but for those who recognized it, it was a cry from history. A piece of the document they thought was completely destroyed, the one that was sealed away, the one no one was supposed to see. Hours later, the post disappeared. The user's account was deleted, but not before someone saved the photo. It travelled quickly through secret channels, private servers, and whispered messages. People started trying to translate it, comparing old hieroglyphs, early Semitic writings, even Babylonian tablets. Nothing matched. The characters didn't fit known patterns. They went against language rules. Many seemed more like diagrams than letters, suggesting the page wasn't meant to be read but to be activated. The Vatican responded quickly. The morning after the photo appeared, strange things happened. A request for digital ownership traced back to lawyers connected to the Holy See was sent about the image. Then, the websites hosting copies were blocked or disappeared. Academics who shared it received threats. A professor at a European school who uploaded a presentation analysing it had her entire channel taken down. No reason given, it just vanished. But the alarm wasn't about ownership rights, it was about authority. Because embedded in the fragment were 3 phrases no one expected to find. Latin text scribbled in the margins with a different ink. Anima externa est realis. The external soul exists. This changed everything. Instantly, it stopped being just an old object. It became a danger, a challenge to generations of teachings. If the external soul worked as the fragment suggested, then consciousness, personality, even forgiveness might not work the way we were taught. Such ideas don't just challenge faith, they break it. A leaked message from a Vatican communications advisor showed the internal trouble. They couldn't explain how the fragment got out. They couldn't predict what else might appear, and most alarmingly, they couldn't figure out who had the original. Meanwhile, an unknown group claimed to have more pages. They started posting puzzles online, clues hidden in audio tracks and satellite images. One message simply said, "Memory remains intact." It was just sleeping. The Vatican stayed quiet, but for a moment something broke. A piece of forbidden knowledge entered the world. A section of an old book that had once been locked away in darkness. And people saw it. They really saw it. No one understands who revealed the fragment or how long they'll last, but one truth is clear. The fight against memory continues, and some stories refuse to be buried. His name was Father Matteo Darko, a quiet person, always in the back rows of Vatican meetings, never speaking unless asked. He wore thick glasses, walked with a slight limp, and worked in the archive department that no one talked about. Far below the apostolic library, past entrances that needed more than just keys, places that required permission and secrecy. He was a keeper of records, a bookkeeper of spirits, as his fellow archivists joked. He catalogued materials that didn't officially exist, locked away manuscripts, burned texts, contained artifacts that glowed under the wrong light. And then there was the ledger, the one wrapped in darkness, the one the church never fully understood. It passed through his hands 6 times in 20 years, and each time he documented its existence. He also made notes in a personal notebook, not electronic, not typed, pen on parchment hidden inside a fake binding labelled The Stories of the Saints. Weeks before the International Historical Conference in Florence, word started going around that Father Darko had received an invitation to present, not on the main stage, just a private discussion, inconsistencies in the timeline of ancient Christian artifacts. But someone leaked the preliminary conference schedule. His name appeared under a session titled Irregularities in Religious Dating, and below it a footnote included first-hand accounts from the Vatican collections. This was enough. 3 days before the conference, Father Darko disappeared. He didn't quit. He wasn't transferred. He vanished. His home was found untouched. Papers on the counter, drink still warm, no sign of a struggle, no message. The last image of him is from blurry surveillance footage. He's seen leaving the archive building just after midnight, with a leather bag and looking back. The recording cuts off after 7 seconds. The Vatican made no official statement when asked. A representative simply said that Father Darko had begun a period of spiritual reflection, but insiders whispered something different, that someone had broken the rules, that a file marked Mundus Periculosus had been checked out in his name and not returned. 7 days later, another strange thing happened. An anonymous package was delivered to the home of a language professor who had studied with Darko before. Inside was a single torn page from a personal diary. It said, "I was warned, but I had to look at it. I had to understand what it meant." The tablet is not just a symbol. The spirit travels, memory lives beyond the body, and someone, somewhere, is hunting the keepers. The handwriting was confirmed to be his. Whether Father Darko ran away, was captured, or changed into something else is still unclear. But his disappearance wasn't just one person's problem. It showed that even in the most protected places on Earth, memory leaks out. Documents slip through the cracks, and when they do, the people who look at them sometimes disappear. It wasn't a calendar like we think of calendars. No months, no weeks, no Sundays or extra days. It was a spiral, a circular arrangement of symbols, letters and sky alignments that looked more like a piece of art than a timeline. But hidden in the forbidden manuscript was a tablet called the Code of Osiris. At first it looked like fancy mystical stuff, amber ink spiralling out from a central symbol, but then someone noticed the points where lines crossed. They matched solar eclipses. Not just any eclipses, ones that hadn't happened yet. When the manuscript was supposedly made, a Jesuit scholar tried to figure it out using regular Gregorian calendars. Nothing matched. The dates were off. Some stretched for hundreds of years. Others didn't point to a recognizable day at all. It was like the manuscript followed a different way of existing, a different way of measuring time. Time. One that didn't count from the birth of Christ or Caesar's system, but from something much older, something that came even before the Egyptian kingdoms. A specific part of the spiral lined up perfectly with a huge volcanic eruption in the year 535 AD. The same eruption, some historians think, caused a mini ice age. But here's the mystery. The manuscript didn't have the year 535 in it. It actually skipped whole chunks of years. Instead of counting forward in order, it marked time in periods of memory, times of forgetting, times when history was changed or erased. These weren't just days moving forward. They were changes, deletions, alterations in the fabric of human civilization. A translated part of the edge said, "Time is not progress, it is echo and reflection. Whoever controls memory controls existence." The Vatican got that part of the document almost instantly. The scholar who found it was moved, his research taken, though not before a picture of the spiral got out to a private network used by astronomers. It started a lot of attempts to figure it out. A scientist in Prague noticed that specific parts of the spiral matched moon patterns, but backwards. Another in Cairo suggested that the calendar wasn't about the sky at all, but about the mind, that each symbol stood for a shared experience of pain or awakening. What bothered the church wasn't just the strange way of dating things, it was what the code hinted at. That history isn't set in stone, that someone or something had changed time before and left a secret guide, not to predict the future, but to remind us of a past we no longer remember. There's an idea that the Code of Osiris was a tool for coming back, a way to return to timelines that had split off, to experience what had been taken away. But trying to understand it is dangerous, because once you start to see how time bends, you start to feel the changes in your own memory. You start to notice what's missing. The people you once remembered, the places that never made it into the records, and you realise that maybe time didn't forget. It was told to. They thought it was just decorative little star symbols scattered along the edges of the manuscript, like star patterns drawn by a clueless scribe. But someone found a pattern, some symbols matched known star groups, Orion, Sirius, and the Seven Sisters, except they weren't where they should be. Not for the skies of 3000 BC, nor for any documented Egyptian system. When they mapped the positions using modern star software, the results made no sense. The sky the manuscript showed had never been real. Unless the timeline was turned back much, much further. Stars move very slowly over time. Astronomers call this precession the slow wobble of the Earth that shifts our view of the cosmos through cycles that last for centuries. Using this celestial dance, researchers can look backward at ancient skies, revealing what our ancestors saw thousands of years ago. When they applied these calculations to the mysterious manuscript, something amazing came out. The star patterns didn't line up with 3000 BC as expected. Instead, they pointed to 10,500 BC. This discovery hit like a lightning bolt, because that's exactly when Orion's belt would have mirrored the 3 pyramids of Giza, if those monuments had existed in that distant time. Traditional Egyptologists completely reject this idea. They insist the pyramids were built around 2500 BC. However, the manuscript's star design suggested something much, much older. Someone was studying the skies long before our established timelines. Someone had recorded these observations with such accuracy that only direct witnesses could have captured them. The star map was just the beginning. The document contained ceremonial instructions that required specific cosmic conditions. Certain prayers needed eclipses at the equinox. Others needed alignments between Sirius and some celestial body now lost to history. Researchers tried repeatedly to match these requirements to known historical periods, but nothing lined up. Then they looked even further back, beyond the established dynasties, beyond Mesopotamia, into the supposed emptiness of prehistory. There, the pieces started to fit. The ceremonial timing matched celestial events from over 12,000 years ago, before written language, agriculture, and everything we know about the start of civilization. This discovery brought up a crucial question. Who were these ancient record keepers? The manuscript only called them the first observers. They didn't rule with kingly power, but with star wisdom. They didn't build monuments that reach for the sky, because the skies already came down to talk to them. One section called them the architects of memory. Another said their settlements mirrored celestial patterns so the stars would never forget Earth's existence. If accurate, this document isn't Egyptian at all. Egypt might have inherited these teachings, preserved and built its culture on a lost predecessor. The Vatican marked this part as fake, dangerous, a challenge to the Bible's timeline, because if this star code holds the truth, then the story of civilization didn't start along the Nile. It started much earlier, with people who understood the stars so well that they wrote them down before recorded time began. For generations, the Church fought astronomy, not just the scientists who studied it, but the very urge to look up and wonder. People faced prison for saying the Earth wasn't the centre. Some faced execution. This always seemed like fear, as if the Church was afraid of space itself. But maybe it wasn't about cosmic science at all. Maybe it was about something much older, something hidden beneath the Egyptian deserts, a truth they couldn't let come out. Inside the manuscript, there's what looks like a warning. It describes the sky not as decoration, but as the vault of memory. Each star represents a point on a vast map, a secret code. With the right understanding, you can trace not just history, but destiny. The ancient Egyptians didn't just watch the stars for farming plans or flood predictions. They believed the heavens reflected the human soul, that sky events affected earthly matters. The manuscript describes a ritual called the Night of Mirrors, performed only when certain groups of stars formed what they called the Eye of God. According to the text, this arrangement revealed messages hidden in starlight, patterns only visible from sacred sites built with sacred math. Pyramids, obelisks, temples, structures that turned the sky into stone. These ceremonies promised enlightenment, long life. Some whispered that the right combinations could unlock the doors of memory, pathways to lost wisdom. But here's what terrified the Church. The formation of the Eye of God, when figured out with modern software, reappeared in the early 1600s, precisely when Galileo pointed his telescope at the sky and discovered Jupiter's moons. That's when tensions exploded. Galileo was silenced, his writings forbidden. Behind closed doors, Vatican astronomers were ordered to avoid looking at certain parts of the sky. not for religious reasons, but out of fear. Fear of discovery. Deeply buried archives show that church scholars knew about these star patterns long before the telescope was invented. They had inherited Egyptian star charts, figured out pieces of manuscripts, and understood which alignments to avoid. A memo warns of an approaching eye formation and urges clergy to distract people with holidays and calendar changes. So, when the church attacked astronomy, it wasn't afraid of science. It was afraid of memory. It wasn't fighting knowledge. It was fighting memory. Because the sky, correctly understood, could have torn everything down. The dates, the stories, the authority. That chapter of the manuscript ends with a puzzle. Words carved in 3 languages. The stars remain silent until questioned. It means that the truth lasts, still watching, still waiting, but only for those brave enough to look up and ask the right questions. The war against astronomy was never about science. It was about control. And the stars, as far away as they are, still hold what we were forbidden to know. There's a place in the Vatican most people never hear about. Not the Sistine Chapel, not the secret archives. This one is spiritually older, but it's hidden in plain sight. The Vatican Observatory, a science station run by Jesuit priests. It seems harmless enough. Telescopes, star research, quiet monks watching the skies. But underneath it, hidden beneath layers of stone and silence, there's a room not on any public map. No signs, no lights. Just a metal barrier secured by a rarely seen key. They call it the hidden chamber, and inside it the stars aren't just scientific information. They're warnings. According to leaked documents, this chamber was found by accident during renovations in the early 1900s. Behind limestone walls were stairs leading down to a circular room with no windows and a black painted vaulted ceiling. The walls had carvings that didn't match Catholic symbols. They looked older, Egyptian. Symbols of the Eye of Ra, the scarab beetle, a snake wrapped around constellations. At first, the workers thought they had found a forgotten burial chamber. But the symbols weren't about death, they were about the stars. In the centre of the chamber is a huge stone table with star charts carved into its surface, but not modern ones. These constellations don't match any current sky. They show a different arrangement of stars, one that only appears once every several thousand years. The same alignments described by the Egyptian manuscript. The same alignments connected to memory and resurrection rituals. Next to the table is a smaller stand with a lens set in black glass. When candlelight shines through it, images are projected onto the ceiling. Not today's stars, but their ancient arrangement from a lost age. Some researchers secretly studying the room say the projection matches the Egyptian sky around 10,500 BC. A time traditional historians call pre-civilization. And yet someone preserved that sky here in Rome, in secret. Early Vatican astronomers kept journals that mentioned the chamber. One calls it the Hall of Inversion and warns that it holds maps too close to the source. Another simply states, the stars lie to those who do not listen in silence. The Church not only inherited this knowledge, but tried to bury it. Not out of hatred, but out of terror. Terror that the heavens would reveal that history didn't begin when they claimed it did. When modern scholars asked for access to the chamber, it was denied. Officially it doesn't exist, but internal communications refer to its location. Security logs show limited access during important celestial events. And the oldest blueprint of the observatory includes a room marked with one word, Egyptus. The Vatican may have wrapped its past in ceremonies and fancy clothes, but beneath the telescopes, carved in stone and starlight, lies a truth they never wanted us to discover. A star map, a historical key waiting for the right eyes to open it. At the end of the manuscript, there's a passage different from history or ritual. It seems like a warning, as if someone foresaw what was coming. Not dramatically apocalyptic, but subtly sad, as if light had once lit the world and someone had slowly and deliberately stolen it. The passage says that this light was not the light of the sun or fire or anything visible. It was knowledge, not just facts or dates, but understanding, memory, the deep truth that lives in the soul. It called this light the flame of knowledge. And it said that when the flame disappears, people don't even notice it's gone. They keep existing, they build churches, empires and belief systems, but they walk in a fog shaped by those who stole the light. This part of the manuscript doesn't name bad guys, it doesn't blame specific groups, but it talks about engineers of faith. That's the exact phrase. Engineers. Not prophets, not teachers, engineers, builders of systems, designers of reality. People who not only erased the original light, they replaced it with something fake, a different kind of shine, built on rules, fitting in, and fear. A light that looks holy on the outside but leads nowhere, just circles and shadows. The writer says that when people forget the real light, they start to mix up memories with old stories. They forget old knowledge, like how to talk to the stars, how to understand the earth, how to listen to their inner quiet. They start to be scared of questions, calling anything unknown evil or wrong. The world gets smaller, safer, controlled. But in that safety, something special disappears. One sentence stands out from all the rest. It says the light wasn't hidden, it was hidden inside us. This is what makes this warning different. It's not about blaming the Vatican or other groups. It's about what we allowed ourselves to forget, what we gave away, little by little, for comfort, for certainty. There's a final picture, like a story with a lesson. It describes a candle put inside a sealed jar, still burning, but invisible. And the people outside the jar start to believe the flame never existed. They stop looking for it. They stop wondering. Until a child, who doesn't belong to any religion or group, picks up the jar and opens it. The room lights up, not with fire, but with memory. That's how the manuscript ends. Not with orders, not even with hope. Just a quiet thought that the truth isn't dead. It's just waiting. Waiting for someone to remember, for someone to notice the fog, to walk through it and feel something warm, still shining underneath. That light was never lost. It was just taken, and only from those who stopped looking for it. In the last pages of the manuscript, there's no prayer, no song, no curse, just a drawing. It's made with faded red ink, like it was copied from something much older. The lines are sharp but strange, curving in ways that almost look alive. At first, it looks like a plant or maybe a ritual diagram, but looking at it longer shows changes. Some see a tomb, others a cathedral. Some see both at the same time. At the top of the page, it's labelled in a language that doesn't match anything else in the manuscript. But underneath, someone had scribbled a translation in Latin, Porta Ultima, the last door. The drawing is like layers, like steps going down but twisting inwards. It starts above ground with what looks like an Egyptian temple door, tall, narrow, with columns on the sides. Behind it is a room shaped like a Christian crypt, with arches and what looks like an altar. Even deeper, the lines twist into a maze with rooms labelled not with words but with symbols. Suns, moons, snakes, eyes. One room is different. It's a perfect circle, at the very bottom and surrounded by marks that don't belong to any known culture. Inside that circle is one sentence written in the same red ink, Locus excitatio, the place of awakening. No one knows where this place is. The drawing doesn't give directions, no map. But strangely, when researchers put it over certain old Egyptian plans and old cathedral plans in France and Italy, spooky similarities appeared. Not perfect matches, but close enough to make you wonder. Too close to be a coincidence. A Vatican document mentions it only once and very vaguely. It calls it a wrong mix, a blend of pagan building styles and holy geometry meant to trick believers. But then it adds a curious note. Access forbidden, watch at all times. As if they weren't just hiding knowledge, but hiding a door. The manuscript never says what the Chamber of Awakening actually did, but clues suggest it served a purpose beyond just worship, a place where truth could be changed or brought back, where the coverings of faith could be ripped away, where the spirit could see not just who it was, but its journey through time. Maybe it was a symbol, maybe just an old story built on older stories. Still, the ending of the manuscript seems on purpose. Not dramatic, not final, just a last symbol left out in the open, like an open challenge or an invitation. Between the old bones of Egypt and the worn stones of Rome, the symbol hints at a doorway that remains, not blocked off, not secured, just ignored. A final passage meant not for fear, but for those brave enough to wonder where the journey truly ends. The last page of the manuscript is almost empty. No art, no long old writing, just a few words scratched in hurried ink as if they were never meant to be found. It clearly states the portal rejects stone, requiring only a key made of flesh and awareness. Nothing else. No background, no guide, just that sentence. Most people took it as a metaphor, a poetic way of saying wisdom comes from within. But hidden in the margins of a Vatican translation document lay an anonymous note from a scholar. Short but unsettling, not symbolism. The final ceremony needs a breathing channel. In other parts, the manuscript describes rituals that use artifacts, objects shaped in stone or kept in crystal. But this final part talks about something different, a human being, someone who is alive, someone who, without knowing it, holds inside them a piece of lost knowledge, not in their blood, but in their awareness, a buried echo, a reality that was erased from the world and yet somehow survived inside a living person. It doesn't explain how this person is chosen or how they would know their burden, only that they must remember something the world was forced to give up, something so old that time itself tries to reject it, a word, a sound, an emotion. No one can say, but the manuscript says the ceremony only works if the key remembers. Not believes, remembers. The Vatican's reaction to this part was unheard of. They didn't just file it away or mark it secret. They sealed it inside a special vault marked in crimson ink with the phrase prohibitus per defectum humani, forbidden due to human flaws. As if even reading it was a threat to memory itself. What makes this mystery deeper is that during World War II, a monk in southern Italy wrote down something amazing. A woman appeared in his holy place, saying she was the lock the world can't hold. She carried nothing with her, no artifacts, no papers, just a strange calmness. When asked what she meant, she replied, "The spell isn't carved, it's lived, and I have lived it." Within days, she was gone. No identity, no records, she just vanished. Some thought she was crazy, others believed she was the living key. The manuscript described a person who somehow kept a piece of something wiped from everyone's minds. This brings up a chilling idea that history's most powerful secrets might not be in books or buried underground, because sometimes the key walks among us, unseen, hidden in a stranger's glance, or a vision you can't explain, or a memory you never had, yet somehow recognize. The final portal doesn't give in to force, it responds to recognition, to someone who remembers what no one else dares. Not witchcraft as we understand it, but something older, more subtle, and infinitely more dangerous. He worked alone. No fancy degrees, no help from big groups, just an old computer, flickering candles, and a collection of photos smuggled from archives by a friend who was never heard from again. His name was Matteo D'Angelo, a language expert, a college dropout, and, some say, the last person to read the entire manuscript. Matteo wasn't the first to try translating it. Dozens had tried partial sentences, poetic bits, or single symbols. Most gave up. Some lost their minds, some disappeared completely. But Matteo kept going. He believed the manuscript wasn't just a record of ceremonies. He suspected it was a warning or instructions, maybe both. He kept everything offline, printed every page, covered his apartment walls with notes written in Latin, Greek, and something he couldn't identify. He compared it to old Coptic prayers, Egyptian funeral texts, and ancient Christian writings that had been kept from the public for a long time. Day and night, he worked with shaky hands and whispered prayers. After 6 months alone, he sent a message to a contact in Prague. One line: "It is complete, but it must never be spoken aloud." This was his last message. 72 hours later, Matteo was found dead in his home. No signs of breaking in, no injuries, no violence. Just an overturned chair, a broken mirror, and every page of his translation burned to ashes in the kitchen sink. His computer was gone. His phone was wiped clean. The only clue left was a single sentence carved in black ink inside his front door. "If you speak the truth in the forbidden tongue, time pays attention." The police called it a stress-related breakdown. Friends called it suicide. But those who knew his work saw it differently. They believed Matteo had done the impossible. He had translated the entire manuscript and faced the consequences. An anonymous message appeared in a hidden forum days later. It suggested that Matteo had not only unlocked the translation, but the resonance. That the words were not meant to be understood in modern terms, but to awaken something ancient in the listener. A frequency, a memory, perhaps even a trigger. The message disappeared in minutes. The account was deleted, but someone saved a copy. Matteo had discovered something the Vatican feared more than the actual content of the book. Not the spells, not the diagrams, but the language itself. The original language that existed before written words. A rhythm of sounds and vowels that didn't describe reality, but shaped it. Words that reminded the world before time was measured. He had written that once the manuscript was fully spoken, even softly, it could never be undone. And now no one knows where his translation rests or who else is studying it. It started quietly. A blurry photo in a dark corner of the internet. A single page from the lost manuscript, uploaded without explanation, with a watermark of a symbol few could identify. At first, no one believed it. The writing looked too old, the ink too faded. But then someone noticed a line that matched a forgotten Coptic hymn. Another found a diagram that reflected the sacred math hidden under the floor of a church in Ravenna. Piece by piece, the silence broke. Within days, the image had spread deep into the internet. It wasn't popular, it wasn't viral, but it was spreading like roots underground. Scholars who had spent their lives buried in libraries suddenly were emailing each other at midnight. Historians who used to laugh at old stories were re-examining maps and ancient star charts. A language expert from Alexandria posted a video claiming the manuscript symbols weren't Egyptian at all, but something much older. She insisted the patterns weren't just writing, they were blueprints. Then the church leaders got involved. At first, they denied everything. Just speculation, just fantasy. But someone inside the Vatican leaked an internal document. It was dated years earlier and marked confidential. It warned of a piece of an unclassified text that could shake up church teachings if released. The document used the same term found in Matteo's burned notes, lux perdita, the lost light. That's when everything changed. A Jesuit scholar in Argentina broke the rules and published research on ancient ceremonies similar to Mass. He claimed they were found in tombs previously protected by the high priests of Amun. A monk in Ireland left his monastery and publicly stated that the early church had hidden scrolls proving they didn't invent the idea of resurrection. A bishop in Prague quietly asked to retire, then disappeared completely. The pattern was speeding up, but it wasn't just academics. Artists started making strange images without knowing why. Poets started writing in symbols they swore came from dreams. Teenagers started making videos, comparing Egyptian rituals with Christian sacraments and asking questions no one could answer without rewriting history. And underneath all this, people started to remember. Not facts, not timelines, but feelings. The belief that something had been stolen, that memory had been carved out and replaced, that the stories we were told weren't false, they were incomplete. The church reacted. Press releases, interviews, carefully planned silence. But it was too late. The crack had spread, and once the light gets in, it doesn't go back. Something had changed. The world was the same, but the questions had grown, and questions are hard to keep down. It didn't end with a big reveal. There wasn't a final chapter that made everything clear. No discovery that solved every mystery. What came instead was quiet. Not the quiet of hiding or fear, but the kind that makes you think, like something just beyond your sight is waiting for you to notice it. And for those who had gone down that road, who had looked at every little piece and figured out every hidden message, a strange feeling started to grow. What if this old book was never meant to be fully translated? What if it wasn't supposed to be understood just by looking at it? The last page looked blank, or so they thought. But under a special light, in just the right conditions, faint shapes started to show up. Not letters, not symbols, more like echoes, patterns that didn't match anything in any known language, yet they felt familiar, like a memory you can almost grasp, a sound you heard in a dream, a thought that isn't yours but somehow belongs to you. Some thought it was the key, others said it was the lock. The deeper people looked, the more the manuscript seemed to push back, not by hiding, but by showing too much. It didn't tell a story. In the usual way, it hinted, it pointed, it woke things up. And in different parts of the world, those who had once ignored it began to feel it. Not the fear the Vatican expected, something older, something without a name. There were stories of people having the same dreams, a flame without heat, a voice without sound, a door made of mirrors that opened inward instead of outward. Artists started to draw it, children described it, old people remembered it, the light without flame, not darkness, not fire, but something in between, something that had always been there, hidden behind language, behind rules, behind the stories we were taught to believe. It started to show up in old songs, in ancient carvings, in the quiet spaces between chants. It was never named, but it was always there. And those who found it didn't feel enlightened. They felt memory, not just personal memory, but something shared, something buried. As if the manuscript wasn't showing something new, it was reminding us of something very old. The church called it a trick, a spiritual sickness, a clever bit of old magic. But they couldn't stop the feeling. Because the manuscript wasn't just talking, it was remembering for us. And by doing that, it brought something to the surface. A question more dangerous than any secret. What if the real truth was never lost? What if it was never buried in ink or stone? What if it lived inside us all along? What if this manuscript wasn't the message, but the spark? And what it lit was something that could never be put out again. Because memory isn't paper, it's fire, and now it burns again.